illnesses caused by improper care of our biodiversity, let us find out what is GMO, genetically modified organisms. So what is its impact to science, health, and politics? So based on the evolutionary theory, the concept of survival of the fetus implies that living organisms have a natural spectrum of characteristics such as size, mass, or length. The characteristics of an organism and its successor can be modified today by modern technology, giving rise to what are called genetically modified organisms. In 2001, Rosalie Eliasus, a former overseas Filipino worker in Singapore turned farmer, attended the Integrated Pest Management in Farmers Field School and was introduced to BT corn, a genetically modified corn that is resistant to the destructive Asian corn borer. Ms. Eliasus volunteered for a demo testing in her field. BT corn yielded 7.2 tons per hectare as compared to a regular yield of 4.2 tons per hectare. So no insecticide spraying was used. This is one of the success stories of genetically modified organisms. Genetically modified organisms is a plant, animal, microorganisms, or other organisms whose genetic makeup has been modified using recombinant DNA methods. It is also called gene splicing, gene modification, or transgenic technology. It is the result of laboratory process wherein genes from DNA of a species It is the result of a laboratory processes where genes from the DNA of one species are extracted and artificially inserted into the genes of an unrelated plant or animal, also called genetic engineering, or genetic modification, which is the GM. Because of these processes involved in the transfer of genes, GMO are also known as transgenic organisms. Genetic modification aims to address issues with regard to food security, agriculture, drug production, and nutrition. There are some roles of GMO in the food and agricultural industries. This was identified by the Center of Ecogenetics and Environmental Health in 2013. Among these are pest resistance, genetically modified plants to resist certain pests. An example of this is the BT corn of Ms. Eliasus, wherein the DNA of the BT corn have been modified with the gene of Bacillus thuringiensis, a soil bacterium that produces proteins which is toxic to corn borers, or the worms that attack the corn, So that is that is one of the role of GMO in the food or agricultural industries. Next is the virus resistance. Virus resistance because they are genetically modified plants to resist certain virus. So an example of this is the genetically modified papaya or a rainbow papaya. The papaya ring spot virus is known to be the detrimental to papaya plants. The protein of papaya or PRSB, that is the papaya ring spot virus, PRSB, was introduced to the papaya plant through plant tissue, which turned out to be resistant to the virus itself. The effect was like the virus humans have against measles and influenza virus. So, a specific tissues from the PRSB as being inserted to papaya or the rainbow papaya. Another one is herbicide tolerance. So, genetically modified plants that tolerate herbicides. An example of this is the Roundup Ready soybean. Glyphosate, an herbicide for weeds, was introduced to soybeans, making it tolerant to the herbicides itself. Farmers can then now spray the herbicide killing the weeds but not the soybeans. So that is how the GMO affects the growth of the plants. Next is the fortification. This is genetically modified plants fortified with certain minerals. An example of this is the golden rice. Golden rice has beta-carotene. The precursor of vitamin A was introduced through biosynthesis genes to the rice, making the rice grains fortified with vitamin A. Most of the product, the fortification is being done in IRI, the International Rice Research Institute in Laguna, in Los Baños, Laguna. Next, the cosmetic preservation. Genetically modified plants resist natural discoloration. An example of this is the Arctic apple. The apple variety was genetically modified to suppress the browning of apple due to superficial damage. Kaya, napakaganda ng apple kahit saan siya galing, ano. So, increased growth rate, that is the last one. Genetically modified organism that has higher yield in growth than normal species. An example of this is the aqua advantage salmon. A gene from the ocean pout, an eel-like fish, was introduced by the Pacific Chinook salmon, making the salmon to grow faster than at the normal rate. So see how big it is. So it really helps. The GMO really helps the agricultural and foods industries. Now, the GMO in non-food crops and microorganisms has its own advantages also. Genetically modified organisms to this non-food crops and microorganisms involves the following. Flower production. GMOs in flower production are seen in modified color and extended base life of the flowers. Example, of blue roses, the so-called blue roses, which are in reality, the color is purple, contain cyanidin 3.5 and 5-diglucoside, together with a large amount of flavonols. The introduction of the flavonoid 51 hydroxylase gene into pelargonidin and cyanidin path producing rose cultivars diverts and anthocyanin biosynthetic pathway toward the production of diplenidin glucosides and for the flowers colors to blue. No? So before the color of the rose is lilac or purple. So inserting those different genetically modified organisms, it turns out to be blue. Okay. So paper production. Modified characteristics of trees for higher yield of paper production. Example are the poplar trees. The lignin is a complex polymer in trees that is removed from wood to make paper through crop process. Through inserting genes that could ferulic acid in young poplar trees, the lignin structure is modified, making lignin easier to break down. That is according to Veneza in 2014. What about in pharmaceutical production? Modified plants to produce pharmaceutical products is just like the periwinkle plants. Bacterial genes are added to the periwinkle plants to enhance the product of, what do you call this? Wemblastine, no? And usually added to the drugs or cancer treatments. And like Hodgkin's lymphoma. That is according to Rungopan in 2010. The bioremediation used for modified plants that can assist the bioremediation of polluted sites. An example is a shrub of tobacco. So, It shows that a high-level accommodation of zinc, lead, cadmium, nickel, and boron and produces high biomass. That's why it modified with phytogelatin used as a bioremediation. Next is for enzymes and drug production. The use of modified microorganisms that can produce enzymes in food processing and medicines. An example of it is the artemisinin. Artemisinic acid is a compound used for anti-malarial drug extracted from sweet wood plants through genetic engineering. It can be synthetically produced by yeast and bacteria with sweet wood plant gene. That is according to Zimmer in 2006. Next is GMOs in medical field. Genetic engineering is playing a significant role from the diagnosis to treatment of human-dreaded diseases. It helps in the production of drugs, gene therapy, and laboratory. An example of that is the humulin. This was a genetically engineered insulin used for type 1 diabetes. At first, the insulin came from pig and cows, but it has some allergic reactions that happened. In 1978, researcher from City of Hope of National Medical Center and Genetech biotechnology company was able to produce a human insulin. So the gene for the insulin was inserted with a bacterial DNA that was able to produce almost exactly the same of the human insulin. This was the breakthrough in the mass production of human insulin. So in 1996, the modified human insulin was approved, and it was called Humalog. Okay? Now, the next to it are the benefits of GMOs. First, higher efficiency in farming, of course, because with the use of the pesticides and herbicide tolerance to GMO crops, there will be less use for herbicides and pesticides, and lower cost for labor and cultivation will be employed, right? Next is the increase in harvest. So the resistance of these GMO crops to pests and diseases means increase in potential growth in harvest. Another one, control in fertility. So controlling the purity of the hybrid seeds ensures higher yields. Increase in food processing. Altered characteristics of GMO crops yield ease for food processing. Next is improvement of desirable characteristics. So GMO offers longer shelf lives, enhanced color, taste, enhanced production reduction, and enzymes of the modified characteristics of plants, animals, and microorganisms. Next is nutritional and pharmaceutical enhancement. The GMO crops like maize fortified lysine, golden rice fortified with vitamin A and iron. There are now the edible vaccines for viral and diarrheal diseases, and reduce the results of fertilizers and pesticides. So in animal industries, there are ongoing researchers like studies on the Pacific salmons that grows faster than the native salmons. However, GMO animals are all research laboratory and not yet approved for public consumption. Now, let's find out what are the potential risk of GMOs. Of course, since these GMOs are new, despite of its promising claims, the genetic engineering is still young as a branch of science, so there are inadequate studies on the effect of GMOs to humans and environment. Next, genetic engineering promotes mutation in organisms which in the long-term effect is still unknown. So those are the very light risks. And also, human consumptions of GMOs might have the following effects: more allergic reactions. So GMO food trigger more allergic reactions, more so create new ones and side effects for the gene alterations. Gene mutation. So It may be develop abnormalities and mutation more than the desired product of a gene alteration. Antibiotic resistance. So maybe it contains antibiotic resistance genes. This may cause disease-causing bacteria likely to be more antibiotic resistant too. So increasing the possibility of widespread of the disease. So those are some potential risks. And the last one, nutritional value. You may have change in their nutritional value because that is genetically modified product. Okay? So, potential risk caused by GMOs. Yan, potential environmental risk. No? So, that is environmental risk. Risk in gene flow. There is a potential risk in the modified gene to be transferred from the GMO crop to its relative or organisms in the soil and human intestines. So, for example, a decaying GMO plant can possibly transfer modified genes to the bacteria and the fungi in the soil. So, bacteria and fungi are examples of soil genetic material from their surroundings. So, there are no studies yet on the effects of absorbed modified gene to the other organisms. Next is emergence of new forms of resistance in secondary pest and weed problems. So the GMO crops resistance to certain pesticides may trigger new pest resistance, while GMO herbicide tolerance crops may lead to overuse of herbicides, which may trigger from wide weed resistance. No? Recombination of virus and bacteria to produce new pathogens. The modified gene of transferred and integrated in the viral and bacterial genes may lead to bacterial or viral gene modification or mutation. This living modified virus and bacteria may then cause new diseases that may affect other organisms, including human beings. We have also other direct or indirect environmental risks caused by GMOs. One of these for the direct environmental GMO is the introduction of GMOs in the natural environment that may cause disruptions of natural communities through competitions and interference. There's also the possibility of unexpected behavior of the GMO in the environment. Next is it might cause harmful effects to the ecosystem processes. Another one, the persistence of GMO genes after its harvest, which may cause negative impact to the consumer of these GMO products. An indirect environmental risk are alteration of agricultural practices, like managing negative impact of the GMOs to the environment. It may have also an impact to biodiversity caused by alteration in agricultural practices. May have varied environmental impact due to GMOs interaction and release in the natural environment. So these are the potential environment risks caused by GMOs. What about the potential human health risk caused by GMO? First, may have an adverse effect. It is because it is not organic, so it is genetically modified, so high risk for adverse effect is expected. Huh? Next, may alter the balance of existing microorganisms in the human digestive system. Production of toxins may be detrimental to human health, and production of all allergens may have adverse effects on humans. Okay? So, consumption of this GMO might lead to those different potential risks. So, worldwide, there are many campaigns against GMO food consumptions. they encourage the people to boycott GMO products and to be vigilant in checking if the foods has the GMO ingredients. So in the Philippines, the Supreme Court ruled against the use of BT eggplant or biotechnology eggplant, another genetically modified crop. So other potential risks that raise major concern are Human Genome Project, mapping of human genes to provide framework for research and studies in the field of medicine. Another one is mutation of genetically engineered microorganisms. Genetically modified bacteria and viruses may mutate to become more resistant and virulent that may cause more dreadful diseases. Cloning, the asexual reproduction of organisms using parent cell through genetic engineering. In February 24, 1997, the first mammal dolly shipped to Scotland and it was born through cloning. With its celebrated success came the fear of human cloning. So the emergence of ethical issues of man playing God. Scientists and medical practitioners would definitely continue to search for the ways to preserve lives. Now let's continue with this Cartagena Protocol on biosafety. So when we talk of Cartagena, these are the protocol in the international agreements in which to ensure the safe handling, transport, and the use of living modified organisms resulting from biotechnology that may have adverse effects on biological diversity, taking also into account risks to human health. It takes precautionary approach by making sure that the countries are provided with the data necessary, make informed decision before agreeing to the importance of such organisms into their territory. So the Codex, which is known as the Codex of Alimentarius Commissions for the Food and Drug, which is the PAO, that is the Food and Agriculture Organizations, together with the World Health Organization, created this Codex. Codex is an intergovernmental body that develops the Codex Alimentarius, known as the development of standard, code of practices, guidelines, and recommendations for food safety. So we have also the International Trade Agreement on labeling the GM food and food products. The agreements on this requires exporters of GM food and food products to label their products and give rights to the importing parties to reject and accept GM products or genetically modified products. The premise of this policy is that the consumer have the right to know the freedom to choose whether they're going to use this GM or non-GM product. Now let's find out the GMOs in the Philippine context. Introduction of GMOs in our country created issues and controversies similar to other countries with GMOs. There are, of course, proponents and opponents of these issues. In 1990, the creation of the National Committee on Biosafety of the Philippines through Executive Order No. 430 of 1990. The NCBP developed the guidelines on the planned release of genetically manipulated organisms and potentially harmful exotic species in 1998. In 2002, the Department of Agriculture released Administrative Order No. 8, the guidelines of the importations and release into environment of GM plants and plants products. On the same year, the entry of GMO importations started. The Philippines was marked to be the first country in Asia to approve the commercial cultivations of GMO when GM corn planting was approved in 2002. In December 2002 up to present, there are 70 GMO applications approved by Department of Agriculture for their release on the environment. 62 GMOs of which are approved for food, feed, and processing. And the remaining 8 were approved for propagation. In 2004, Philippines was classified by International Service for Acquisition of Agri-Biotechnology Applications as one of the 14 biotech mega countries, which 50,000 hectares and more GMO crops annually. In the same year, Senator Plavier authored the Bill of Mandatory Labeling of Food and Foods with GMOs. The Senate did not pass the bill. In 2006, the Philippines became part of this called Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety. In the same year, Executive Order Number 514 was issued to address the biosafety requirements of the Cartagena Protocol and the establishment of the National Biosafety Framework. In 2010, the Organic Agriculture Act was issued, encouraging organic agriculture than GMO-related agriculture. Prior to this act, there are several provinces like Negros Occidental and Negros Oriental, which between the two provinces in 2005 there was a MOA. The two provinces was able to ban the GMO products and the living GMO through provincial ordinance. Similar to this, Davao City passed the Organic Agriculture Ordinance in 2010. The city ordinance implies the preventions of field testing of GMBT eggplant in the UP Mindanao campus. In 2012, Representative Teddy Casino, together with the other congressmen, filed a bill pushing the mandatory labeling of GM food and food products. To date, there is no Philippine biosafety law, only biosafety regulations formed under NBF. In December 2015, the Supreme Court ordered to put an end to the field testing of GMO eggplant and declared Administrative Order Number 8 Series of 2002 of the Department of Agriculture as null and void. This means that any actions and procedures related to GMO importations and propagations is temporarily to put stop until a new administrative order is issued in accordance with the law. In March 7, 2016, 5 government agencies, namely the Department of Science and Technology, Department of Agriculture, Department of Interior and Local Government, Department of Health, and Department of Environment and Natural Resources, passed a joint Department Circular Number 1 Series of 2016 on rules and regulations for the research and development, handling and use of transboundary movement released on the environment, and management of genetically modified plants and plants produced derived from the use of modern biotechnology. So this joint department circular paves way to the issuance of new permits for planting and importing GM crops in the country. So, genetic engineering is an emerging field of science. Its quests are to preserve and prolong life, In more than 4 decades since the first genetically modified bacteria was produced, thousands of genetically modified organisms have been created and propagated. So there is still a long way to go for GMO to prove itself as humans seek answers to life's predicaments, as the humans play like a god. Okay? So with all this different knowledge that you've gained in this lesson, I hope you will realize how important you as a human being. With this, thank you so much and God